If narration is simply telling back something an author said, how can students make it their own? Where is the originality? What makes it more than a reading comprehension activity? Can narration be explained and understood as a viable method for the 21st century? We know that Mason believed narration was not verbal memory or simply a reproduction of what the author said. She mentions time and again that narration was to be told in one's own words. A child's individuality plays about what he enjoys, and the story comes from his lips, not precisely as the author tells it, but with a certain spirit and coloring which express the narrator. A narration should be original as it comes from the child. That is, his own mind should have acted upon the matter it has received. So we understand that narration should not be an imitation of the author's words. However, what does that look like? How different can it really be from the author's text? Mason anticipates our questions and doubts. She writes, how is it possible to show originality in mere narration? She then goes on to answer her question by naming some famous authors. She states, let us ask Scott, Shakespeare, Homer, who told what they knew, that is, narrated, but with continual scintillations from their own genius, playing upon the written word. Scintillations means brilliant outburst. So what do Scott, Shakespeare, and Homer have to do with originality in narration? These three men that Mason mentions, Scott, Shakespeare, and Homer, were storytellers who have captured the world with their skill of language and creativity. Their stories were not original, and if Shakespeare was writing his plays now, he'd probably be sued for breaking copyright laws. But just because their storylines weren't original, that doesn't diminish the brilliance and creativity they brought to these stories. So let's look back at that quote again and continue reading the rest of it. She states, just so in their small degree do the children narrate. They see it all so vividly that when you read or hear their versions, the theme is illuminated for you too. Mason is saying that children narrate in a similar way to these great storytellers. Children bring in their own perspective, their own language, their own touch of personality to their narrations. They are doing what storytellers have always done throughout history. Although our children may not have what it takes to become a traveling minstrel, they all have the natural ability to tell stories. Mason states, children are born poets and they dramatize all the life they see about them after their own hearts into an endless play. There is no reason why this natural gift should not be pressed into the service of education. So Mason is telling us that narration is similar to storytelling and is basically what the minstrels and great authors of the past have always done. They have combined tradition and innovation to create a story that is marked with their personality. So we can think of narration as more than a cognitive exercise to tell back the facts of a story. It's more than a reading comprehension exercise. It is a creative process that calls upon a child's imagination and artistic abilities. Instead of picturing a monk in their cell copying documents word by word, we should picture the singing minstrels entertaining the crowd with their engaging stories. Now, what makes someone a good storyteller? First of all, they need an audience. It's hard to get into the role of a storyteller if you have no one to listen to you, or if the person listening to you is distracted or listening half-heartedly. It can be hard to be a storyteller if the audience is evaluating every word you are saying compared to the original text. So think about that in terms of your child in narration. Are you being a good audience? Are you giving your child your full attention and looking forward to the story they have to tell you? What if you had this mutual understanding with your child that they will engage you with their stories and you will listen actively, not in a critical stance, but with the demeanor of one who wants to be entertained and delighted by a great story. In this sense, narration becomes a kind of performance. It is set apart from the ordinary way of speaking. Performance can be defined as a mode of communication, a way of speaking, the essence of which resides in the assumption of responsibility to the audience for a display of communicative skill. This conception of performance displays a relationship between the storyteller and the audience, and the accountability and expectations that it entails for both parties. When narration is viewed as a performance, there are expectations for both the teller and the listener. It is not so much about how close you get to the original text, but it is about the way you make the story your own individual recreation. That brings a new goal to narration. Since students know they will narrate after they read, they pay attention. And if students know someone is eager to hear their story, they will strive to meet your expectations. What if our children's goal in narration was to present the most interesting narration because they wanted to engage their audience through their words and their unique touches added to it? Did you realize that you have a role to play in narration? Did you realize that your attentiveness or your lack of attentiveness could be affecting your child's narration? Once I saw the connection between narration and storytelling, I looked at the ways that oral cultures told stories to pass down their traditions. Looking at cultures that still value the oral tradition of storytelling can shed light on the ways storytellers create meaning through their performance. Written communication, as opposed to oral communication, requires language to be more precise and explanatory. Oral language is more repetitive, uses more dialogue, and reflects the personality of the storyteller. When you are speaking as opposed to writing, you don't necessarily have the time to think of the most precise word to describe the situation. You are in the moment and engaging the audience and helping them relive the scene. One of the common features that emerged from many studies of oral cultures, both from Eastern Europeans and Native Americans, were patterns such as parallel structures, dialogue, and imagery. This kind of speaking demonstrates a highly sophisticated use of language. A lot of times we think of written language as more sophisticated, but linguists studying oral cultures recognize the beauty and creativity found in oral language. It is more poetic than simple prose. There's something special that happens when someone tells a story. It's a break from a more common or casual way of speaking. That's why I refer to it as a performance. It is set apart, and that makes everyone, in a sense, rise to the occasion. My children know when it's a special occasion in my home. Maybe once or twice a year for a holiday dinner, I'll take out the formal china and set the table with the gold-rimmed plates and the crystal goblets. I make sure to use the white tablecloth and taper candles. When we sit at the table, everything seems a little fancier and more elegant. We are using the dishes that have been set apart for these distinct occasions. Everyone knows there's something different and special about this dinner, as opposed to the night before when we had pizza on paper plates. I see a parallel with language. Most of the language we use is common, ordinary language, and we usually want to get our point across as quickly as possible. But when someone tells a story, or we read a book written literary style, something is special about it. There's something in the words that signals to us that it is a different kind of speech. When someone is trying to get information across quickly, they are using abstract language and getting to the bottom line. But when someone is telling a story, there is a different goal. And when someone enters into a storytelling performance, their language is naturally lifted out of the ordinary into a more engaging speech. They naturally use poetic devices to grab the audience's attention. We can look at language as a continuum with prose at one end and poetry on the other. Prose is the typical way most essays and articles are written. They include abstract ideas and concepts and are written in a more logical manner. On the other end is poetry, which relies on images and figures of speech. However, good storytellers take some of the elements of poetry and use them in their stories. And these are the elements that engage the listener and make each retelling unique because it allows the creativity of the narrator to shine through.